right at the next exit. Turn right at the next exit.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The road to liberty. I am American. That's what I am. And I bleed red, white, and blue.
And welcome back to the Road to Liberty radio show with your host, Seraphin Quintanar and Brian Raymond. How are you today, Brian?
I'm doing well. Good afternoon, Fresno, and thank you for tuning in. After a hectic week, it is Saturday again.
That's right. And before I forget, the call-in number here is 559-442-1680. That's 559-442-1680. Anybody who has a question for us today can call in. We're going to have a guest on again today. His name is Neil Mammon, and he is the author of a book that's titled Jesus Was, and then that's crossed out, is involved in politics. And we're going to be asking him some questions about his book as well as his commentary on some of the hot issues of today. But before he gets on here in a few minutes, we're going to bring up a couple of topics that maybe we'll get to a little bit later on. And feel free to call in with topics of your own or to comment on these. The first one is there's a couple of articles in the news today about the amnesty bill coming out of the Senate. One article talks about... well, the title is that a GOP representative claims a majority of House GOP supports Cantor's DREAM Act, which is a little bit different than the Senate amnesty bill. Here in California, they passed the DREAM Act recently, which gives citizenship to certain students and others who are the children of illegal aliens who have gone to school here, etc., and so on. Another one is Gutierrez, who's a Democratic representative in the House, says that 40 to 50 House GOP will back reform of immigration. And then we have, of course, Jeff Denham, which came out publicly and said that he basically supports the Senate immigration reform bill. So I definitely want to see if we get a chance to talk about
slip
that.
There, Seraphin.
Freudian or purposely, I don't know, but either way, I want to talk about that today, Brian. So we'll get. Actually, we should maybe toss that back and forth a little bit, but let me just mention another headline that caught my attention is Eric Cantor saying that no one is advocating a government shutdown, and that is in response to some of the leading conservatives in the Senate talking about not one more penny for Obamacare, or else they won't vote for a continuing resolution or any appropriations bill that includes any money for Obamacare. And extends, if you extend that out, it means possibly shutting down the government, not funding the government, unless they take all money out for Obamacare. But back to the amnesty, which is what the DREAM Act does. It provides amnesty for some, and the Senate bill and the immigration reform bill also provides basically a form of amnesty. You know, there are those who say, like Paul Ryan. And that's a Freudian slip there, huh?
Too many Pauls.
Yeah. Paul Ryan and Senator Marco Rubio say that we have de facto amnesty right now. That people are here illegally and we're not kicking them out. We're not doing anything about it. So they want to reform the immigration process, the immigration laws, procedures for dealing with people who are here illegally so that they, quote unquote, come out of the shadows. You know, so my big concern with this plan is basically that, A, it's not going to work. If you're in the quote-unquote shadows, and to come out, you got to pay money, taxes, back taxes or fines, and you have to go through a process to become a legal resident or get your green card or whatever it's going to be. Why would you do that if you can just stay illegal and not pay taxes and not pay a fine? Another problem I have with it is once enough people are here with legal status, wouldn't that encourage a new batch of illegal immigrants to come and take the work at a lower wage than they will be willing to do so now that they're legal? What do you think, Brian?
They can call it whatever they want to. Essentially, they say it's de facto amnesty now, and the bill they're pushing through will go from de facto amnesty to real amnesty. I mean, it's a shell game, and you have to watch where everybody's at. If you ask Ronald Reagan, one of his biggest regrets was amnesty.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that was that when Reagan did his amnesty bill, they weren't afraid of calling it amnesty. Number one, they weren't trying to play this game with words. Number two is that package was like this one's supposed to be a comprehensive package which called for enforcement and border security and things like that. But that never came about. So really looking back, you could say, well, we tried it once and it didn't work. Reagan got duped on that one maybe, or double-crossed, or whatever you want to call it. But the fact of the matter remains that they didn't follow through with all the provisions of that law. Right now, one of the selling points is that, well, this time it'll really super duper require them to build the fence. There's already a law that provides for funding for the fence and requires the fence to be built, and it hasn't been built. Portions of it have, but it hasn't been done. So why would more money or more words saying that they have to build it, why would that actually accomplish it if the government can just ignore or not follow through on certain provisions of the law?
Well, Mark Levin had Paul Ryan on about a month ago, and they were talking about this same situation, and Mark Levin raised the same questions that you are, and Paul Ryan couldn't answer him. All he did was get upset because Mark Levin said, hey, this was passed in 1986 with these same exact provisions, minus the drones, and nothing has been done. None of the steps that have already been agreed to have been taken to secure the border. So what makes it any different this time?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. My thing is, there's really nothing new here. It's rehashing what has already been tried and didn't work. And no, something has to be done. I'm not saying we do nothing. What I'm saying is, let's enforce existing laws. Let's look at the process of legalization or of legal residency, and let's conduct an audit and find out what parts of it need to be revamped, sped up. If there's waste and abuse in the system, because there's lots of people waiting in line already. And another thing, it's not fair to people who have come here legally or want to come here legally, have started the legal process, are basically first in line, and now they're saying, and now we're going to tell them, well, despite the fact that you did everything right, we're going to let the people who did things wrong not necessarily cut in front of you, right, but get in line with you. To me, I wouldn't like that. My dad came here from Mexico. He was a legal immigrant.
Right, it's a slap in the face to everybody who's ever come here legally.
Absolutely. My dad was part of the Bracero program, which was a guest worker program, where they were issued contracts for work, 3 months at a time, 6 months at a time. They completed the contract, went back to their country of origin, and then got back in line for another work contract. And eventually, he was able to legally obtain residency here, and eventually became a citizen in the 80s. And that's another thing. Why do all people who immigrate to the United States of America have to become citizens? I'm sure there's some that don't want to. And even if they want to, why does everyone have to become a citizen? Legal residency is one thing, but then this obsession with the path to citizenship, there's already a path to citizenship if some people came here legally.
Yeah. If you follow the pathway now, which, there are some problems, it does need to be fixed, but the way the government's going about it is not going to work. But not everybody that's here to make a dollar wants to become a citizen here. They will get their work visa, the legal resident alien status, and they're happy with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another thing is, of course, the amount of money that's being sent out of our country and mostly to Mexico. They export poverty to us, and then the workers here export wealth back to Mexico, which is another problem. And I suppose that the argument we made on the other side, that's why we need to grant them amnesty or residency so that they feel more at home here. But I don't know how much more at home they can feel since they're already living here. But they're here for a reason, which is to earn money to support their families. But a lot of times their family is back home. So we grant them amnesty, and then what? Their family members can come over under an amnesty as well, so they can be reunited here. So we're going to open the Pandora's box, and we're going to open the door to millions more under a legal amnesty plan. So, that it's a whole big can of worms. Again, if anybody wants to call in and discuss this, we can do so right after our guest is on, which is going to be at 559-442-1680. That's 559-442-1680. And again, our guest is going to be Neil Mammon with the book titled Jesus Was, and that's struck out, is involved in politics. And we'll talk to him about his book as well as other hot topics of the day. See what he opines. Any other background on Neil here that you can give us, Brian?
I've heard Neil speak a few times. Read all of his books. He's got another one, 40 Days to Pray for a More Godly Nation. He's also got Who is Agent X, which is an apologetics book on proof of a creator, which is fantastic. But Neil himself was an immigrant, and followed the right road to get here. So we'll get a little bit into that and some of the things that he faced when he was from Africa. So yes, he's a real African American.
Hey, when you say apologetics or being a Christian apologist, we're not talking about someone who's sorry. For what they believe, right?
No, you know what? When I was first an ignorant Christian, I saw an apologetic section.
I still am an ignorant Christian, but go ahead.
Well, I am too. But I saw apologetics, and I got mad. It's like, why would I ever be sorry about being a Christian? And then it came to light the true meaning of apologetics and apologia and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, for our listeners out there, actually, I thought the same thing when I first heard it. And even though I remember back in when that blur called college, reading from Plato about the Apology of Socrates, in which basically he defends, or at the very least, he describes what his actions were. He was accused, of course, of corrupting the youth, and all he did was really ask questions. So here, an apology is not necessarily being sorry for being a Christian, but defending and articulating the reasons why someone would believe what they believe. So I definitely want to get into that with him, and I want to hear his opinion on certain issues, especially since he's an immigrant from a different continent, who's going to have a really unique perspective, I think, far different perspective than we have being born and raised here in America. He's a legal immigrant, so I want to ask him a little bit about immigration. But we're going to cut away to a commercial break, and as soon as we come back on, we'll have Neil on with us, and we look forward to hearing you on the other side of the break. And calling number is 559-442-1680.
The Road to Liberty will be right back. Now, back to The Road to Liberty on 1680 AM KGED.
And we're back to The Road to Liberty here with Seraphin Quintanar and Brian Raymond. We have coming up right now Neil Mammon, who is going to be our guest. He is a Christian apologist and also overall commentator on politics. Let me see if we can get Neil on the air here. Neil, are you there? Hello, Neil.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hello?
we can hear you now. Okay.
Great.
Well, welcome to the Road to Liberty radio show. And I'm going to have Brian give you a quick introduction and get us started here.
Neil, you're doing well today. That's good. So I just want to basically kind of get into your book a little bit. I gave a little brief introduction before the break. Your book, Jesus Was and Is Involved in Politics, Why Aren't You and Why Isn't Your Church? You're basically saying Jesus was a socialist, right?
Right. No, not at all. A lot of people obviously think that Jesus is a socialist. In fact, if you go on some of the left-wing Christian sites, they will say that Jesus was a socialist because, in fact, they say, look, Jesus said everybody should be healed, everybody should be fed. He fed the poor, he fed the hungry, he healed the sick, so therefore he was a socialist. But now you have to remember this. Jesus said that when he came to people, he says, you take care of the poor, you heal the sick. He didn't say force your neighbor to heal the sick or force your neighbor to feed the poor. See, the difference between socialism and charity, what Jesus was teaching about, was Jesus said, you go out and you work. But what is socialism? Socialism is nothing less than you forcing your neighbor to pay for your favorite charity. Because what you're doing is you're going to your neighbor and saying, look, I want you to pay for this man's health care. I want you to pay for this man's food. I want you to pay for this man's schooling and education. But it doesn't say anything about you putting out yourself only. See, now, so a good example of this is imagine if you lived on a cul-de-sac and there were like 10 people in your cul-de-sac, and the person to the right of you was this rich, wealthy guy. He's been working all his life. He has 20 cars in his garage. And to the left of you is this poor immigrant who has one car, 6 kids, and he's barely making it through. Well, one day, let's say the immigrant on the left, his car breaks down, and he, as a result, he can't go to work, and so he loses his job. Well, you have 2 cars. Can you give one of your cars to the immigrant? Yes, absolutely. Nothing wrong with that. but you need your cars, and your wife has one car and you have one car, and you need both cars because you have to go to work and she has to take care of the kids. So you can't really give them one car easily. Can you go to your rich neighbor on the right and say, can you give one of your cars to the poor immigrant on the left? Yeah, you can. Absolutely. You can go and ask your neighbor, please do. Let's say your neighbor now is Jay Leno, right? And you go to Jay Leno. Jay Leno has like 30 or 100 cars in his garage. But Jay says, look, Neil, this is all very nice, but but my cars are collector's items, and I don't want to give one to your neighbor. So I say, wow, this is a problem here. So I say, I know what I'll do. I'll take a gun, and I'll walk over to Jay Leno's house and hold a gun to his head and say, Jay, I want you to give one of your cars to the guy next door. Can I do that? No, because it's what? It's an act of assault. It's extortion.
Right,
it's a crime, right? So I can't do that. Okay, but now that's just me. We have 10 people in the cul-de-sac. Let's take a vote. So all 10 of us get together and we vote. And amazingly enough, 9 of us vote that Jay should give one car to the poor person. Now, can I take my gun and go to Jay's house and force him to give a gun to the poor person?
Yeah.
No. Why? Because it's still what? It's still a crime.
It's still
wrong.
theft.
Okay, well, that's just us 10. Let's say I live in San Jose, so we have about 1 million people here. Let's say we go to the city of San Jose and we all vote. And it ends up being like 999,000 to one person says that he has to give his car to the poor person. Is it now moral for us to go take a gun and force him to give a car to the poor person? Again, the answer is no. Okay, let's take it a step further. That's just our city. Let's say the whole country decides to do that, right? And all 300 million of us vote, and it's 300 million minus 1 to 1. Now is it morally okay for me to go force that man to give a car, for Jay Leno to give a car to the poor person?
Of course not.
Of course not. So it's never okay for me to force anybody else to do anything for a poor person. It's fine for me to do it, but it's certainly not moral for me to force other people. And what is socialism? Socialism is simply that, is forcing other people to give their things to the poor, not giving yourself. And so Jesus was never a socialist.
Yeah. Hey, Neil, this is Seraphin. So that, I forgot what the quote's from, but that's the saying of, what's socialism? That's 2 lions and a lamb voting for what's for dinner.
Well, I think that was democracy too, but yeah.
Socialism, democracy,
We are a republic, not a
I have a question.
democracy.
Yeah, I have a question. Right. It's kind of similar. It's not about money or possessions, but it's a little bit similar. What do you say about legislating morality? For example, then is it government's role to legislate, for example, the definition of marriage, or take any host of social issues? Is it is it consistent with Christianity, or is it something that is moral to have government force people to accept a standardized view of social issues?
Okay, well, the first question we should ask is, can we legislate morality? And I go through this in the book. By the way, if your readers are interested, you can find the book at JesusIsInvolvedInPolitics.com. JesusIsInvolvedInPolitics.com. So what I say in the book, and I clarify what this issue, because a lot of people come up to you and they say, well, we can't legislate morality. Well, this is actually quite silly, because if you think about it, there's not a single law that's not a legislation of a moral value. I mean, think about it. Think of any law you can. I was once in a debate or a discussion with a friend of mine who's a PhD from Stanford, and he told me, oh, you can't legislate morality. And I said, well, give me an example of a law that's not based on a moral value. And then he couldn't think of any, so I started to tease him. I said, what about the law against stealing? Oh, no, that's a moral value. Mm-hmm. And he was like glaring at me. I said, oh, I know. The law against killing. Oh, no, that's a moral value too, right? So by this time he was like hating me, and I said, come on, give me an example. You're got a PhD, you're from Stanford, you're a sharp guy. Give me an example. And he couldn't think of one. Finally comes up with this. He says taxes. I go, what do you mean taxes? He said, well, taxes, they're not based on. I said, no, they're based on a moral value. The moral value, there are 2 moral values they're based on. One, the moral value which is the correct moral value, is that I should pay for any services I take. So if I drive a car on the road, my taxes should go to pay for the road, right?
Right.
That's a moral value. I should pay for what service I get. There's another moral value that I don't agree with, and that is the moral value that most of us are forcing on, is that we should pay to take care of other people.
Right.
So it's not that our laws are not based on moral values. They're all based on moral values. The question is, whose moral values are they going to be based on? Yours, mine, Mother Teresa's, or Hitler's?
Definitely not the latter, yeah.
Right. Now, the answer is none of those. The answer is all moral values should be laws should be based on moral values, but none of them should be based on yours, mine, Mother Teresa, or Hitler's. They should be based on what the Declaration of Independence claims they should be, and that's what the laws of nature and of nature's God.
Okay.
Very clear in the Declaration of Independence, that's the basis for our fundamental rights, and the basis for the Declaration of Independence is the laws of nature and of nature's God.
Yeah, and then, to play devil's advocate, pardon the pun, then the question arises, who defines which God?
Exactly.
So if maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit.
So the next problem then is, well, who's God? Well, in the book, I actually have a way to articulate which laws we should legislate. And it turns out that you actually can come to an agreement, even if you disagree on which God is the God, you can actually come to an agreement on which laws to legislate. And the book is quite clear about it, where I say, basically, we should legislate against laws that would we should create laws that would protect people from harming others. Okay. So any sort of law that you pass that would protect people from harming others is the kind of law that you want to pass. So, in other words, if you drive too fast, that could kill somebody, you want to pass that law. So there are certain laws that you need to pass to protect other people. There are other laws that you pass to allow people to do things. So the government can do one of three things. It can permit. Okay? So it can permit two people to live together without being married.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
It can prohibit. It can prohibit an adult having sex with a minor. Why? Because it's bad for minors. Okay? It's bad for society. And then it can... Go ahead.
Oh, no, we were just agreeing with you.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know about Brian, but I agree.
Promote. Pardon?
No, we agree.
Okay, sorry, I missed that. Okay, so the last thing it can do is it can promote. Right? Now, what does that mean? Well, it promotes things it thinks is good for society, because the government is a contract amongst society to help that society maintain itself and continue and be stable. So it wants to do certain things that promotes. Well, it wants to promote charities. So it says, you know what, we're going to give you a tax deduction for doing charitable work, because we think that's very good. It wants to promote certain things, and it promotes those, and what it does, it gives you tax breaks or it gives you advantages for being that. Now let's look at marriage.
And Neil, there is a difference, of course, right, between promote and insure. In other words, promote the general welfare, but not to guarantee or insure it, right?
No. There's no guarantee of anything. In fact, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it doesn't say it doesn't say in the guarantee of happiness. It says the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
You can pursue happiness, but we're not going to guarantee you results. Nobody ever guarantees results except for unions where they guarantee pension results, right? Which is why they're going bankrupt right now. Right. So, and there's always the natural law always comes back and fights people. Eventually, it's going to hurt people.
Okay.
And the union people are going to get hurt the most.
Neil, we're coming up on a break, but hold that thought, and we'll come back about the gay marriage issue. Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
The Road to Liberty. Right back. Now, back to the Road to Liberty on 1680 AM KGED. KGED.
And we're back. Our guest right now is Neil Mammon. He is a Christian apologist and author, a public speaker, and heavily involved in politics. Neil, are you still with us?
I am indeed.
All right, sir. You were getting on the promotion of certain things that the government does. I believe you were on the issue of marriage.
Yeah, so the third thing that the government can do is it can promote things, and as I said, it promotes things like charities. And it promotes things that it views as good and beneficial to society. So now let's look at marriage. Marriage has a lot of important things. First of all, even marriage without kids, even if a man and woman get married, that has a great benefit to society, because marriage has the tendency to tame men and to control them and to focus their output or their production into constructive ways. Men who are married tend to build things. They tend to think long-term. They think long-term into the future. They have a more, if you will, a global and a more social view of their entire life and their productivity. Secondly, marriage also allows men to live longer. Men actually live a lot longer if they are married than if they are single. Thirdly, what marriage does is it protects women. It allows women to have a nurturing environment where they are protected and they are also nurtured and they can also grow the most. So now marriage has a great advantage for just men and women. That's just for men and women. Now, let's add children into the picture. Children, all the statistics have shown that children grow best or do best or develop best when they have a father and a mother, male father, female mother, biologically male father, biologically female mother, in the home, present while they're growing. Now, that doesn't mean that kids whose parents have died or one have died will always do terrible, but statistically speaking, so if you find one child who's done better, that you don't take that as your example. You look at the statistics of the overall, how many kids do better when they have a father and a mother, and overall, most kids, and it's not a small amount, I mean, it's like 75% to like 3% or 10% or something like that. There's a big difference there. And, it's the same thing like, if you can go out and you can find a smoker who's 108 years old. Probably. That does not mean smoking is good to get you to 108 years old, right? I mean, we all know that there are people who smoke that have not died of lung cancer. That does not mean smoking does not cause lung cancer. It just means that's an exception to the rule. So in the same way, we're looking for the statistical analysis. The statistical analysis says kids with fathers and mothers in the house, non-divorced, do far better than kids without. Okay, so that's the case for marriage. Now let's look at the case for same-sex marriage. This case for same-sex marriage, there is no benefit to society whatsoever in same-sex marriage. The married males don't gain anything. They don't gain any longevity in life. In fact, most married gay males in countries that have same-sex marriage, their behavior patterns have not changed with respect to monogamy or having sex with other males. Similarly, with female homosexuals, with lesbians, again, no great change in marriage, does not bring anything to the community, does not bring anything to them. It brings nothing that a piece of paper of legality would not. So there's no advantage to society to promote same-sex marriage. There's no good reason for them to do it. There's a good reason for them not to persecute them. It's a good reason not to discriminate against them, but they can do all that legally with a piece of paper. For instance, if a person needs to visit somebody else in the hospital, $10 lawyer's paper, a thing that you write up and says, I give you permission to visit me if I'm ever in the hospital. Right. No rights for $10, and that gives you all those permissions.
Okay.
What it does not give you, Social Security benefits. But again, society gains nothing by paying you somebody else's Social Security benefits if you are in a same-sex marriage. But it gains a lot if you're in a heterosexual marriage that stays together. So.
Okay, Neil, now I want to steer the topic a little bit. You grew up in Africa, correct?
I did.
So you're an African American?
Well, I was born in Africa, so yeah, I guess you could call me that.
That was just a little dig. Anyways, you grew up where you got to see the difference between a government-run healthcare system and a Christian-run medical facility. Am I right?
Right. Yeah.
Can you explain the difference between the two? And when I heard you speak at a church, you had an idea that would better equip a Christian church, a Christian hospital, to take care of people rather than the government. Can you go into a little bit of detail on that?
So I mean, if you think about it, remember we said that charity should come from the Christians and the individuals. So as you go out and reach out to people, you don't force your neighbor to do it. And the reason is because if you force your neighbor to give money to a charity, that charity then has a guarantee of that money coming in. So that charity being the government in this case, has a guarantee of that money coming in, regardless of outcome. So in other words, it doesn't matter how many people get helped or not. In fact, the less people that get helped, the better for the government, because it can come back and say, I need more money, I need more money, I need more money, right? But if you go to a private charity and you've been giving them money for 10 years and they have no results, guess what? You're not going to give them any more money. And so every private charity has a vested interest, A, in actually helping people, and B, in proving to you that they help people and getting rid of the dead wood. So now let's look at a public healthcare system that I visited when I was in Yemen. So actually I was born in Ghana. I grew up in Sudan and Yemen. And Yemen was it was a fascist socialist state. By the way, just for a clarification, there are no right-wing fascists. all fascists in history have been socialists. Okay, so this right-wing fascism is nonsense. Right-wing, even the word is wrong. All fascists are socialists. Hitler was a fascist. He was a National Socialist. Mussolini, from which the name comes from, was a fascist. He was a socialist. Idi Amin was a socialist and a fascist. And in fact, Saddam Hussein was a socialist and a fascist, the Ba'ath Party fascist. So all fascism is socialism. So anyway, so we're in a fascist socialist state, and a socialist state basically says we'll take care of the people for you. So this fascist socialist state would take care, but they would give them health care, they would give them food, very bad, all these things. But the health care was reasonably decent in the sense that they had health care. Well, you'd go to the hospital, let's say you wanted to go to the hospital, you'd see about 400 people sitting there. And they were all waiting, and they've been waiting there for hours to get to see the doctor. Well, the doctor is not incentivized by the number of patients he heals. He's got a salary, so he has no incentive to treat them any different than any special, because they're not like they'll come back to him if they get healed or go somebody else if they don't, right? So whether they get helped or not, he's still going to get paid. So there's no incentive. However, the doctor happened to be a friend of my father's because he happened to be an Indian. So here we show up, right? We show up in the socialist healthcare thing, and guess what? Hey, there's Neil's father, and I know him. So guess what? He gets to go to the head of the line. You see, what happens in a socialist state is if you know the people who are in, then you get special preference. Everybody else, the peasants, get to sit at the back of the line and go through the whole thing. And that's what you see happening today in America. You see, oh, if you know a senator personally, then you get special favors. Oh, if you know this, then the senator gets you money for your pet projects. Or the senator gets you this. This is going back to the days of kings. Remember back in the days of the royalty? Oh, if you were a friend of the king, then you would get a dukedom, or you would get this land, or you'd get this special appointment if you were a friend of the king.
Well, Neil,
is that what America's supposed to be?
Yeah, and you see, I mean, Congress tried to exempt themselves from Obamacare, right?
Oh, yeah.
Or to subsidize it for themselves, and then they actually ended up negotiating, I guess, with the president, who exempted all of Congress from Obamacare.
Right. The president came out
which
directly.
Which I think is illegal, right? Don't we have a law? You can't choose. You can't choose to apply the law selectively to a few people and not to others. You see, and I think that's all messed up right there. Are we back in the days of royalty? Oh, well, I'm a duke. Yeah, I'm a senator, so I'm a duke. I get special preference. This is the tragedy of the socialist system. It just means that everybody gets horrible preference services except for the elite few. Well, guess what? Are you going to be in the elite few? What are your guarantees that you will be in the elite few? And is this the way that we want America to be run? So the healthcare system, and it costs so much. I mean, they would waste money. I mean, any socialist healthcare system wastes hundreds and thousands of dollars. On the other hand, and it was dirty. It was a mess. So on the other hand, I could go to the Christian-free hospital, which was one city away in Thais. It was a beautiful hospital, clean, run by American Christians and doctors. And you go in there, there's a lady there who's dedicated her whole life to working with Yemeni people, because this is in Yemen, and she loves the Yemeni people. She ministers to them. There's nurses, there's doctors. You go in there, they treat you wonderfully. They care about your healing because, they care about your salvation. They care about you. They care about ministering to the poor. That's their call in their life. And guess what? It's virtually free. Now, we can pay for it, and we would make a donation to all that. But it's free. Now, guess what? How much that money costs? Guess the quality of service between the Christian hospital and the public hospital. And guess how much money the Christian hospital costs versus the public hospital. It turns out that any public anything that's done publicly will cost about 6 times as much as anything that's done privately.
That sounds about right.
And, because there's a lot of money that goes to pensions, it goes to past pensions, past union dues, this and all that stuff. It goes to buildings, it goes to all this, people building their empires, and then people never getting fired from government jobs. Like as Reagan said, the only thing next to immortality is a government program. It just grows and grows and grows. Whereas in a Christian organization, they're usually lean and mean, and if not, their funders will come and say, hey, what's going on? Something's wrong here. And guess what? That money doesn't cost anybody else. When a Christian gives the money to a charity or organization, it really doesn't cost anybody else any money because the government gains out of that. For instance, if you look at a local church, the average local church provides something like, I believe it's an average local church of about 200 people, provides almost $114,000 worth of services to the county. And that's in counseling, that's in taking care of kids, after school programs, that's all these things that they do, feeding the poor, all that, and that's a church of about 200 people, and that's estimating that they were paying their volunteers at $11 an hour. Now, I don't know any government worker that gets $11 an hour.
Yeah.
Okay? We're talking at least $30 an hour plus the pensions and everything. We're talking almost $60 an hour, okay? So really, $114,000 a year for many churches is probably a low number. They're probably saving the county at least $500,000 in services. So my question is, why not move all these things over to the churches, right? Let me give you one more example. I was on a radio show a while back talking about this church in Yemen and all that. And a lady calls up and she kind of starts berating me. She says, "You're crazy." She says, "You think that, the churches can take care." Well, I was just at my hospital the other day, and it's the latest. It's got the state-of-the-art. It's got this CAT scan MRI system. And are you saying that your church can take care of that? You saying your church will be the state-of-the-art? Well, you're crazy. There's no way. This is 2011. That's a few years ago. This is 2011. You're just out of your mind. I said, "Ma'am, I just have one question." She goes, "What?" I said, "What is the name of your hospital?" Long silence. The host starts chuckling, right? He knows where this is going.
I think I know what's coming.
Long silence. And finally she says, "St. Jude's, but that's not important." I said, "Ma'am, who do you think started that hospital? Where do you think it started from?" You see, we have the greatest hospitals in the world. Christians have the greatest hospitals in the world. We have the state-of-the-art everything. The reason it costs so much is because the government is willing to pay money for it. And anytime the government is willing to pay money for something, it's going to cost more. If the government was willing to pay money for sand would be $10 an ounce.
Yeah, or we would run out of sand. But hey, Neil, we're coming up on a commercial break here. We want to thank you for being on the show today. We really appreciate it. You had a lot of good information. You make a great argument for your side there. Anybody who wants to call in after the break and ask questions about what we just talked about or what we talked about earlier on amnesty or something else, you can reach us at 559-442-1680. But again, thanks to our guest, Neil Mammon. His book is Jesus is Involved in Politics. And where can you get that again, Neil?
JesusIsInvolvedInPolitics.com. JesusIsInvolvedInPolitics.com.
Great. Thanks so much, Neil. Appreciate the call. And we'll take a commercial break, come back, and maybe take a couple calls and discuss a couple of things. So we'll see you on the other side of the break.
The Road to Liberty will be right back. Now, back to The Road to Liberty on 1680 AM KGED.
And this is Seraphin Quintanar along with my co-host Brian Raymond. Hey, Brian, that was a real interesting guest. Thanks for lining him up. I agreed with a lot of what he had to say. There's a couple of things where I think I have a little bit slightly different take. I'm all for charity, Christian or not, as long as they're doing the right thing. When it comes to government, I take a slightly more secular point of view. But I do agree that the government needs to do far less and let private charity do far more. I also believe that just like the government has taken the father out of the home in many cases, especially amongst those that are of lesser economic means, by substituting government and government programs for the father figure, I think the government has also taken steps to take charity out of our society. So charity, the private sector and charity alike are far more efficient. They can do it with less cost, less people, and do usually a better job. But what happens is our government, people say, well, if you just leave it to charity, things wouldn't get done. These services wouldn't be available. But they were available before. But as they tax us more, we have less money to give to charity. As they threaten to take a tax-exempt status from charities, or when the IRS is targeting advocacy groups, there's less incentive to be charitable. So I think if the government were to step back, you would see a response in more than equal measure from the private sector, from private charities, to step up and fill the vacuum, so to speak, and help those who really can't help themselves. Because also there's so much waste in government, and these programs, which are a lot of times well intended, but we know the saying, that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. They're well intended programs in many cases, but there's so much waste and abuse and fraud. And and then the government has a hard time getting in there and weeding out that waste and abuse. Whereas a private charity, I think, would have being more local and more connected with the community, has a better chance of controlling that fraud and abuse. And like any organization that size, there's going to be some bureaucratic mistakes, and there's going to be some room for abuse and fraud, but it's going to be a far greater control of that, so the people who really need these services get them.
Well, we did it for over 100 years, 200 and plus, without government intervening in every aspect of our life, and we saw nothing but we saw nothing but progress. Let's just look at the education system. I know it's off topic, but it's a point to be dealt with. The local schools and the people there know they know what their students need, whereas a government bureaucrat does not. And it's the same thing with healthcare. Those in the area know what that area needs, where the government bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. has no clue what Fresno or Merced or Modesto, California need.
Yeah, and actually that's where a lot of the waste comes in there too. What they do is they tax us. They send the money to Washington, D.C., where we pay bureaucrats over $100,000 a year plus their whole benefit package. Then they send us back the change, and then they tell us what we can do, what we can't do with it. So it's not really an effective or efficient way to redistribute wealth, quote unquote. Whereas, I see this, that our whole governmental system is upside down. Our local officials, the city council, the mayor, the sheriff, should have far greater impact on our daily lives than people in Washington, D.C. or even in Sacramento. People say that often that someone who's, let's say, a city councilman is going to run for higher office. I don't see that. I see that as they should be going to a lesser office. Our congressman should be the lower office, and our city councilman should be upheld as one of the highest offices, because they are the most accountable to us, but also the ones that should have the greater impact on our lives.
Right. The municipality should have the power rather than the big government. Yeah.
Hey, we have a caller on the line, Robert from Fresno, and so let me get Robert from Fresno here on the line and see what his question is. Go ahead, Robert.
Good afternoon, Seraphin. I once had a pretty inspirational thought came to me, and that is that when a person gives out of his own free will, in the Christian way of looking at life, he's given grace or something. There's something good about that gift that comes to him. But yet, on the other hand, with socialism, when it's not voluntary and it's forced on you, you're robbed of that opportunity to get this grace.
Yeah, and I think I know what you're talking about, Robert. Basically, you can be a blessing to your community. When you're charitable. However, when you're forced to do something, you don't actually benefit personally from that. You can't be forced to do a kind act, because now you're doing it out of necessity to avoid the penalty for not doing it. So, from a Christian point of view, and I don't want to make this Christian talk, but from a Christian point of view, you're not benefiting from that act because you're not doing it willfully. You're actually doing it against your will if you're being forced to do it. But that's a very good point, Robert. I think, when people give willingly and happily, that's when really good things can start happening. But back to this whole idea of the government versus private charity. When I grew up, I went to now it's Boys and Girls Club, but it was the Boys Club of America, and there was a local chapter, and we had to raise our own money. We didn't have government grants or things like that. We actually had fundraisers where we built things and sold them, and we had dinners and sold tickets to wealthy sponsors to raise money for the club. And we also didn't have all these restrictions coming down from us from government, telling us what we could do and couldn't do. Later on, when they started taking money and grants from various governmental agencies, then they had to start following other things, and political pressure started to come to bear. I'm not against there being a Boys and Girls Club, but that came as a direct result of political pressure to open it up to girls. And it changed the dynamic. When you're a group of guys, and the counselors and the instructors there and the people running the place are men, you learn things a certain way. But when you introduce women, now it changed the dynamic. And it's no longer trying to help these young boys become productive men. Now it's more of the everyone's equal. Almost like it became very feminized. A feminist movement moved in to the boys club. And I'm not against having girls clubs, but why does it have to be the Boys and Girls Club?
Yeah, another thing with the Boys and Girls Club, I have a friend who runs professional wrestling benefit shows, and he did a charity for the Boys and Girls Club of Merced, wrote them a check for the donation amount, and it was like 2 months later, and they still hadn't cashed it, because that is the proficiency of government.
Yeah, if we can improve the efficiency of government by 15-20%, I think we would see a huge difference in the way our government operates. But now if we switched it over to private charity, private individuals, private enterprise, it would be, we would literally be astounded as to how things would improve.
Well, I'm not a big fan of a lot of things like Mitch Daniels, former governor,
right.
Mitch Daniels does or says. But one thing he did is he privatized the roads in Indiana, and it went from being crap every square mile on the roadway to an efficient, well-oiled machine when it got into the hands of a private company.
Yeah. Well, funny you mentioned that, because people will say, you need government to do these public works. And a lot of times here in California, especially when we talk about like high-speed rail, they talk about the Golden Gate Bridge. Well, that's a toll road. You got to pay to go across it. Why government and why not private enterprise? Why can't we have private enterprise build a bridge? But as long as government gets out of the way and doesn't put all these bureaucratic hurdles and regulations in front of them, they could probably do so. They've done so in the past. I wouldn't mind a turnpike, if the road was well maintained, right? If I knew if I knew that the road would be well maintained, and I knew that what the traffic would be on it like, and they're not going to be doing road work in the middle of the day, for example, I'd be glad to pay it. Now, some people wouldn't be able to pay it. And I'm not opposed to public roads, but I think that they can work side by side, public and private, when it comes to certain things like that.
Right. But, the point there was the efficiency there of private versus public. And I think the more we can take away from the government and put in the hands of the private sector, the more positive results we're going to see. And it's proven time and time again.
Yeah. Well, Brian, we're wrapping up here. We can go on forever, obviously. But we want to thank everyone again for listening in on the Road to Liberty Radio Show. You can go on our Facebook page. Just search for Road to Liberty Radio. You can go on our website, which is roadtoliberty.net. And also, Brian wanted to give a quick shout out before we go off there.
Yeah, I want to just let everyone know we're having prayers for my nephew Brantley, and I want to thank the staff at Valley Children's Hospital and also UCSF, where my mother's recovering. And I would like to give a happy birthday shout out to my dad.
AM 1680, KGED, Fresno. More conservative talk radio.